Let the record reflect that the defendant is present along with counsel for the defendant, Assistant State Attorney. Okay, I talked to Dr. Orlander yesterday evening after she completed her exam. Both sides are aware of her findings.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Vickers shared them with us.
Would anyone like to have her testify via phone? Basically, she indicated that she's still found the defendant to be competent to proceed.
We're willing to stipulate to that.
Ms. Vickers,
No testimony needed.
you stipulate to the fact that Dr. Orlander found the defendant competent to proceed.
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right. Who is the defense's next witness?
Defense would call Dr. Eric Means.
Okay, let's return to jury.
All rise for re-entry.
You may be seated. Does the state recognize the presence of the jury?
Yes, Your Honor.
And does the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I hope you had a restful evening. Did you follow all of my previous instructions?
Yes.
Thank you. The defense may call their next witness.
Defense will call Dr. Eric Means. Please raise your right hand and face the front.
She solemnly swear the testimony she gives shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Mings.
Good morning.
Would you state your full name and spell your last name for the
Sure.
record?
It's Eric Lawrence Mings, M-I-N-G-S.
And Dr. Mings, what is your profession?
I am a psychologist. I do forensic psychology on a pretty much full-time basis.
Okay. And how long have you worked in the field of forensic psychology?
Since I was on an internship in Gainesville, Florida, when my internship was at a VA, but I requested placement at North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center in Gainesville, which is the state hospital. And that's when I began doing forensic work, and I've pretty much done it ever since then.
And about what time was that?
That was 1987.
Okay. And what degrees do you hold?
I have 3 degrees. They're all from the University of Florida. I got a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology in 1980. The same year I entered graduate school in their clinical psychology program at Shands Hospital. During the course of that program, you get a master's, which I got in 1984, and then I received my PhD in 1987.
And what did your PhD focus on?
It was clinical psychology. I did my specialization in an area called neuropsychology, which has to do with the effect of various conditions of the brain on behavior. And as I said, I always had an interest in forensic psychology. There was not formal training at that point in time in my program. So when I went to the Veterans Administration Hospital, I requested placement at North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center, which is where I began doing that kind of work.
Okay. And besides the work that you're doing now privately, what other positions have you held? You've mentioned North Florida Evaluation and
Right.
Treatment.
I did part of my internship there. I was offered a job when I finished. I had already planned to move to Orlando, but I took a part-time position with them while I established myself in Orlando as a staff psychologist there for several months. Then I got hired at Orlando Regional Medical Center's Brain Injury Rehabilitation Program, and I was their staff neuropsychologist for between a year and a half while I established private practice. I've been in private practice ever since. A lot of what I did initially was regular clinical practice, a lot of assessment work. I also have done other things, like I had a contract with an agency called Correctional Medical Authority, which was tasked with overviewing the healthcare in the prison system. So for a number of years, I would intermittently go to prisons around the state of Florida to participate in their quality reviews of the healthcare in the prison system. I haven't done that in some time. They cut way back on that. I also have a contract with Orange County Jail for an annual review, quality review of charts for mental health staff that they need to have done for accreditation purposes. And I occasionally do other kinds of assessments as well.
And you had mentioned that North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center is a state hospital. Is it your average hospital, like it has an ER, you can go there when you're sick, or is it a specialized type of hospital?
No, it's a forensic state hospital. At the time that I was employed there, it was a combination of people who were found incompetent to proceed, not guilty by reason of insanity, and at that time they also had what was called a mentally disordered sex offender program. Subsequently, that was discontinued by the Department of Corrections, so my understanding now is that their population is consistent of people who are either incompetent to proceed or not guilty by reason of insanity.
Okay. And I take it you're licensed to practice in the state of Florida?
Since 1988.
Okay. And you mentioned mostly forensic examination. What other types of examinations or evaluations might you do in your work?
I do, well, forensic, I mean, there's two types. I do criminal and civil. I don't do very much civil. When I'm involved in civil cases, it has to do with brain injury. I do primarily criminal forensic, which is what I enjoy doing. I also occasionally do evaluations for other purposes, like I've done vocational rehabilitation evaluations in the past, and I've done evaluations for other purposes. I don't do, at this point in time, I don't do any kind of therapy or treatment. I used to do that for many years, but I don't anymore.
So it sounds as if your practice is primarily focused on the criminal justice system and how mental health is related to that area.
Correct. I have been doing this for a number of years. Historically, the vast majority of the work that I do has been court-appointed as a neutral court expert. I've been retained privately as well by one side or the other. My best estimate of how many evaluations I've done over the years is it's over 5,000. It's probably middle of there, approaching 10,000, based upon the reports that I have from the last half of my career when I kept them on my computer. So I do forensic work pretty much every day.
And approximately how many, or what percentage would we say of those evaluations would you estimate are done specifically for sanity at the time of the offense?
There's a lot. There are evaluations in which, particularly with court evaluations, sometimes they ask both the question of competency to proceed and sanity or mental status at the time of the offense. I would say that's not the majority of them, but I certainly over the years would say that it's probably thousands of them I've done for one reason or another.
Okay. And have you previously been qualified as an expert in the court system?
Yeah, many times in state and federal court.
Any states other than Florida?
The only other state I've done any testimony in was in New York for a civil case.
So primarily Florida.
Yeah, I don't like to travel.
Any idea how many times you've been qualified here in the Ninth Circuit?
Many, many times, but I don't know the number. Like I said, looking back at the number of times that I've either been appointed by the court or retained, it's in the thousands. The number of times that I've actually testified is certainly much less, but it's been many, many times.
At this time, I would ask that Dr. Mings be allowed to testify as an expert in the field of forensic psychology.
What says the state? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Dr. Mings will be accepted as an expert witness in the area of forensic psychology. You may continue.
Thank you. And Dr. Mings, were you requested by counsel for the defendant to examine Jason Rodriguez and write a report about the issue of sanity?
That's correct.
And were you paid to conduct that examination and to write a report?
Yes, I was.
And do you see Jason Rodriguez in the courtroom today?
He's sitting right there in front of me.
Could you identify an article of clothing that he's wearing?
He's got a white sort of striped shirt.
Let the record reflect that he's identified Jason Rodriguez.
The record will so indicate.
And how many times have you met Mr. Rodriguez to do these examinations?
I've met him 3 times.
And do you recall the dates of those exams?
Sure. The first time I saw him was on November 9th of 2012. The second time I saw him was on September 27th of 2013. And most recently I saw him on November 11th of this year.
And did those exams all take place in Orlando or some of them in other areas of the state?
The first time I saw him was here in Orlando in the jail. The second time I saw him was at North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center, the state hospital where I mentioned that I used to work. That was in September. The third time I saw him was in the jail.
Okay. And between those 3 examinations, do you have an idea of approximately how much time you've actually spent with Mr. Rodriguez?
I would imagine 8 or 9 hours maybe total.
Okay. And have you reviewed other documentation in preparation for an opinion on sanity in this case?
Yes, I have.
And could you tell us generally what are some of the items that you've had an opportunity to review? Let's start with, say, paper documentation.
Okay, paper documentation or electronic or just paper?
Electronic,
Okay.
assuming it could be printed to paper.
Right, okay. I have reviewed a variety of medical records. I've reviewed various reports from North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center dating from 2010 to this current year. I have reviewed medical records from the Orange County Jail. I have reviewed medical records from Greater Orlando Psychiatric Associates, where he was receiving outpatient treatment in the community. And I have reviewed medical records from Lakeside, which is the local community mental health agency that provides services.
Did you have an opportunity to review reports from other examiners?
Yes, I did. I reviewed, prior to my report that I wrote in terms of this, I reviewed evaluations from several other examiners during the course of everything that's happened over the years. In relation to this specific issue, I reviewed reports from, well, let me back up. I did not see him initially after he was brought to jail. So
Right.
I could not directly comment on my interactions with him regarding his condition at that time.
I think you said the first time that you had seen him was November 9th of 2012, so
Correct.
that's almost exactly 3 years after the incident.
Correct. So I didn't have an opportunity to directly observe him initially.
Which other examiners' reports were closer in time to November 6th of 2009?
Dr. Jeffrey Danziger, I believe, was the first one. Dr. Alan Burns, I think, was the second one. And then the third one was Dr. Daniel Tressler. All of those were within the end of November through December of that year,
Okay.
2009.
And you indicated that you had an opportunity to look at various police reports,
Yes.
statements, things like that?
I was given a pile of discovery documents about that thick. Many of them...
And let me, for the record, you indicated
It's about
with your hands
about a foot, you know.
about a foot thick.
Yeah, I mean, that's my estimate. Many of them were just log reports. Many of them were not terribly informative, but there was definitely stuff in there that was of help in this case. I noticed when I was going through the documents that the vast majority of the information was brought together and well summarized in two primary documents. One is the charging affidavit, and the other one was the Orlando Police Department supplemental report, which I think was somewhere between 20 and 30 pages. So I relied upon them. I also reviewed well, I looked at all the documents to some extent, but when I went back and tried to make sense of them and to summarize what I was reading, those were one of the ones I heavily relied on. I also reviewed a Orlando Police Department digital evidence report, which I don't know the date, but it was part of the discovery that was given to me. And then I reviewed went back and looked at a number of statements that were given, transcripts of statements. The ones that I recall directly were Rafael Velasquez, which I believe was December 1st of 2009, Jesse Forrest, which was November 8th of 2009, Maureen Daly, I believe, November 6th of 2009, and then one by James Beverly, and I don't recall the date of that one.
And why were the witness statements from Velasquez, Forrest, Daly, and Beverly of particular interest to you?
Well, they knew him from before, and they were able to provide me with information about his history at the engineering firm. Of greatest interest to me was the statement of Rafael Velasquez for two reasons. One is that he knew the defendant. He was the only one, I believe, at the engineering firm who had anything approaching a close relationship with him that he would talk to. And the other reason is that Rafael Velasquez is the one that Mr. Rodriguez believes is responsible for the brain hacking during the period of time that they worked at the Turnpike Agency.
And to the best of your recollection, were those four individuals also present the day of the shooting?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
I don't know which. I can't recall off the top of my head which one actually saw him. I know Rafael Velasquez did not actually come face to face with him.
Okay. Besides the paper documentation, which we'll get to in a minute too, what other sources of information did you use to arrive at your opinion?
Well, I had some media files, some video files. One was a interrogation video of the defendant, in which a lot of it he was just sitting in the room. The quality was poor, but I did have an audio of the period of time when he did actually talk, which I believe was about 9 minutes. But the actual video of him sitting in the interrogation room was much, much, much longer than that. I reviewed some videos of jail telephone calls with his family, and I reviewed a surveillance video of the building during the period of time where the incident occurred. It appeared to be a compilation of various cameras at different points in time.
Did you happen to see any video that was created by the media that was immediately upon his arrest as he was being led in or out of the police station?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I looked at that some time ago. That was a media where he was asked a question and shouted a response, yes.
Okay. Yeah. And did you have a chance to do any face-to-face interviews with anyone? Besides, obviously,
right.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Now, I saw him face-to-face. We had scheduled for me to meet his mother face-to-face, but there was some sort of confusion on her part, and we ended up doing a telephone interview, which was done on October 14th of 2013.
And was that helpful to you in forming an opinion?
Yes, it was.
And if we could, let's talk about the opinion that you've come to, and then we'll talk about why. What, as a forensic examiner, what is your understanding of the definition of sanity for the state of Florida?
The person has to have a mental illness, and because of the mental illness, they have to be so impaired such that they either do not know what they're doing, consequences of their actions, or the wrongful nature of their actions.
On a specific day and time, is that
At
correct?
a specific instance in time, yes.
Okay. And is it your opinion that on November has suffered from a mental infirmity, disease, or defect?
Yes, it is.
And what would that infirmity, disease, or defect be?
I believe he clearly has schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia?
Yes.
Any particular type?
Yeah, the reason I said it that way is with the new DSM-5, they have gotten rid of the subtypes that they used to use for many, many years, and now they just call it schizophrenia. There used to be different subtypes of schizophrenia that you would diagnose typically, and under that system it would be called paranoid schizophrenia.
Okay. And in your professional experience, is there particular symptoms, signs, things you look for that identify a paranoid schizophrenic? Are they going to act in a certain way at all times? What do you look for, generally?
Paranoid schizophrenics are ones in which their condition is, sort of by definition, it's dominated by delusional systems which are usually paranoid in nature. They have auditory hallucinations often as well. They have cognitive effects where they may not be able to that they are paranoid enough where they don't like to talk about their delusional system. It can be very difficult for somebody casually observing them to know just how disturbed they are.
So would they look functional? Would they perhaps be married, have a family, hold a job?
They could conceivably be functional like that. The higher functioning ones that are intelligent and relatively high functioning, yes. And it can be hard at times to get them to open up and tell you what's going on. I got this experience first when I worked at North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center. They would send people up to us for evaluation, and I can remember several instances in which my first impression of the person is, I don't understand why they're here. You know, they're not telling me anything that leads me to believe they're mentally ill. And then after I pressed them and then they sort of broke, then they would say really, really delusional stuff, and you could see what was going on. But a lot of times on a casual basis, you may not notice it if you don't necessarily ask the right questions or they're not in the right frame of mind where they're willing to talk.
And the second part of sanity that you discussed is that because of the paranoid schizophrenia, did Jason Rodriguez know what he was doing on November 6th of 2009?
I think that's a less clear issue to me. When I think about someone who doesn't know what they're doing, they may be flailing about in a delirious state. He tells me that he does not remember clearly what happened after he stepped in the door and started shooting. Based upon the information about the incident, it appears that he was shooting at people. He was going through the office shooting at people. So I think it's less an issue of not knowing what he was doing to me than it is the other issue.
Earlier in the day of November 6th, what is your understanding of what his day began as? What kind of activities was he doing?
Well, before that happened, can I go back just a little further, or you want me to start with?
You can, if that adds to your opinion,
Okay.
yes.
His mother had returned back from Puerto Rico several days, I believe, before this happened. She described to me his extreme paranoia during that period of time, involving things such as trying to push matchsticks in the ceiling to stop the cameras, to tear the lining out of the car looking for surveillance devices, to trying to keep them away from windows because he believed some kind of projectile might come in, to getting to a point where he would not allow his son to go outside and play because of his concern of the safety of his family. Not sleeping well, basically staring off into space and being very difficult to engage to get his attention to talk to her, and being very confused about it. The very early morning hours, around dawn or so, she told me of an incident in which he had been sitting there and she thinks he may have dozed off, startled him, he pulled a gun, pointed at her, and she began screaming at him, telling him, you know, this is your mother, this is your mother. And that he eventually recognized her and then apologized and said, I'm sorry, Mommy. That morning, the mother tells me that she had planned, because of what she had observed, she had planned to get him Baker acted, but she wanted to get some support from family or pastors or somebody else before that happened. My understanding of what happened that day from the mother was that she was not ready and allowed him to run some errands. My understanding of what he actually did that day from him was that he went to the school where he had been previously enrolled and tried to re-enroll, but was told he could not because he had an outstanding balance. He told me that after that he went to the post office to see if he had an unemployment check and did not.
Now let me ask you about those errands specifically, and if we're talking about whether he knew what he was doing or not. Did you ever discuss with Mr. Rodriguez whether he was carrying a gun that day?
Yes. Initially, I asked him, and this was my mistake initially, I asked him initially if, when we were discussing the issue of the gun and the concealed weapons permit, if he carried the gun, and he told me that he pretty much carried the gun all the time. I later learned that I may have misunderstood what he was telling me, so I went back and talked to him.
And that was when you spoke to him
The most
earlier
recent
this week?
time, right. What he told me when I clarified it with him was that when he took the concealed weapons training, he had been told there are certain places where he is not allowed to carry his gun. These included bars, federal facilities, schools, and I can't remember if there was another one. And I asked him if it was his practice, because of what he had been told, that he followed those guidelines, and he told me it was. This was not anything out of the ordinary to him that day, that this is the way he had been. When he typically would not carry a gun if he wasn't supposed to be in a particular place, but other than that, he carried it with him constantly because he was concerned about the stalking.
So it sounds like on November 6th, excuse me, he knew what the law was, and he knew how to follow the law.
He factually knew what the law was, certainly regarding the concealed weapons restrictions.
Okay. And when it comes to entering the offices of RS&H, did he still appear to know what he was doing?
I don't know if he did or not. He told me that his purpose in going to the offices was twofold. Was that he believed they were finagling the numbers, I believe is the way he put it, in reference to his unemployment, and he wanted to talk to somebody in the accounting portion about that. But he also told me, excuse me, that he was hoping to find Rafael Velasquez to confront him about the brain hacking, to make it stop.
Did he say he wanted to hurt Rafael Velasquez or shoot Rafael Velasquez?
He didn't tell me he intended to hurt anybody. He wanted to confront him about the brain hacking.
Did he specifically tell you, I did not want to hurt anyone?
He told me that he did not go there with the intention of hurting anybody.
Okay. And you said he remembered with you up to what point?
He remembered with me going to the building up to the point where he walked in the door and, as he describes it, just started firing. Okay. He does not have a clear recollection, according to what he told me, of what happened after that in the building, or a clear recollection of leaving the building. He recalls being in the car, driving home, stopping at a gas station or somewhere to, I believe, buy a cigar, and then going home and sitting down to cook lunch. But tells me he does not recall. After he stepped in the door and started shooting, he does not recall clearly what happened after that.
So it sounds like he knew that he shot his weapon that day.
Yes.
Okay. And did he appear to know the consequences of what he was doing? And how do you take consequences?
Consequences, the way I take consequences is, did he know what was going to happen as a result of the actions to those around him? That's hard to know because he tells me that he doesn't have any clear recollection of what happened. He doesn't know why he fired. He just remembers starting to fire. So it's unclear to me whether he actually rationally understood the consequences, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay. And the last part of the definition, that if he knew what he was doing and he knew the consequences of it, did he know
Condition.
And on the day of November 6th, when the shooting took place, what is your opinion of what his delusions were that were interfering with his ability to know what was wrong?
He had, was based upon information provided by the mom and, information about his prior history. He has a history of paranoid delusions, believing that he is being gang stalked, that he is being brain hacked, that he has communications by extremely low frequency that are causing the voices of Sharptooth to be inside his head.
And what did you discuss with him, some of those phrases? What did he mean by gang stalked?
He meant that people were stalking him, trying to harass him and cause him harm. He was not naming a specific person apart from Rafael Velasquez, but he believed it was they. And when I discussed with him what is they means people that he encountered in work particularly, but also potentially in day life, which he described to me as being people at the engineering firm where this happened, people at the Orlando Public Works, I guess, where he worked there, people at the subway where he worked, and others. He didn't have a clear description of who all the others were, despite me asking him several times, apart from Rafael Velasquez.
Is there some relation between Rafael Velasquez, they, and Sharptooth?
Yes. He believes that Rafael Velasquez is the one who originally, when he worked at the Turnpike, engaged in the brain hacking and did something to his brain that allowed Sharptooth to be able to communicate with him, and that he was the origin of this.
And do you recall what the brain hacking was?
It was an incident where they had gone to look at some equipment or something on the Turnpike, and he had some sensation of some sort of electrical activity in his brain, which he believed was intentionally done so that they could determine the frequencies at which to transmit these messages, which he subsequently believed came from the person called Sharptooth.
Okay. And is it your opinion then that at the time of the shooting on November 6th of 2009, that he was actively suffering from that delusion?
Yes, I believe he was acutely psychotic and paranoid and delusional at that time.
Can you tell us, between the various documents you've looked at, videos, interviews, what is it that forms the basis of your opinion for that?
It's a variety of things. It's from the medical records. It is the records of the previous treatment in the community for his condition, which was eventually became more paranoid and delusional. It was the medical records from the Baker Act at Lakeside. It was the medical records from the Orange County Jail. It was the subsequent medical records from North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center documenting how these paranoid delusions have gone on for years, and I believe up until the very present time. And so that was the medical records aspect of it. There were other records that led me to that. I reviewed some emails to the FCC and the FBI complaining about this, which were very consistent with what he has later said in terms of the delusion.
Your objection,
Sustained.
Okay.
move to strike the last comment.
Motion to strike is granted. Jurors disregard the last comment. Next question.
Can I continue on with other stuff besides that? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I reviewed the, excuse me, let me find exactly what it was called. I reviewed the police reports about the Baker Acts before. I reviewed a document called the Orlando Police Department Digital Evidence Forensic Examination Report, which I think they were initially researching whether he was trying to research.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to them speculating as to what they were doing.
Sustained is the speculation.
Okay. They said that there was no indication that he had researched the victim or the victim's businesses in recent history, that there was information that the suspect believed he was a victim of a computer hacker. They said that there was also a file on the computer of the Internet Crime Complaint Center referral form stating that the City of Orlando RSNH, PBS, and J were using robot spiders and web crawlers from MySpace and Yahoo addresses to conduct character assassination and pornography. I don't believe there was a date on that file, but that was one of the files that they recovered. So there was that in terms of the historical stuff. There was the description by his mother of his bizarre behavior in the period of time leading up to it. There was are you talking, I've lost track now. Is it all the previous stuff, or you want me to go through the subsequent stuff?
What is it that really led you to believe that on November 6th he was still suffering from this delusion to the point that it would make him not understand that what he did was wrong at the time of the shooting?
There were two things. Well, more than two things, actually. There was the information from the mother about his behavior in the days leading up to this, particularly having pulled the gun on her that night, or early morning, whatever it was. All the paranoia about the way he was acting, that he believed that they were in danger and that there were projectiles that may come through the window and they were under surveillance and all of those other sort of things. There's his description to me of continuing to believe that he was being stalked and harassed, and that Sharptooth was communicating with him and threatening him and his family. And then there is the issue of his behavior surrounding the period of the incident, okay, where he walks in the building, begins firing, doesn't say anything to anybody, doesn't apparently make any verbal interaction with them, and says he doesn't remember what happened. Calmly leaves the building. The surveillance video that I reviewed shows him walking away from the building calmly. Tells me that he basically then remembers going back to the house, stopping at a convenience store to get a cigar, going home, sitting down, putting the gun on a table, beginning to cook lunch. Tells me that at some point in time the TV is on and he sees the video of everything that's going on, which he describes to me as being sort of like a movie, and seeing faces of people morph on it. And
You said morph?
Morph, yeah, like change. And then becomes aware that the police are outside and gives up. In terms of how some of that stuff is relevant, is, to me, there's no indication he attempted to hide his identity. There's no indication that he attempted to make an active effort to get away. He went home. He went directly home after getting a cigar, sat down. His mother tells me that she noticed that he was staring off into space like he had been doing quite a lot in the period of time leading up to this, and difficult to engage. And appeared to be out of it, basically, according to her. And then as we get further away from the actual incident, we have the interrogation video where he's sitting there very flat the whole time. The officer makes repeated attempts to engage him to get him to tell him what he did. He eventually gets him at one point in time to talk for a brief period of time, I think approximately 9 minutes, maybe less than that. Even though he, at one point, after being given his Miranda warnings, he says that, I think it was something I want to invoke my right to silence, he continues to talk at that point. As well as I know, he does not ask for an attorney. He just simply gets to a point where he says, "That's all I want to say," and he stops. So there was not, he didn't interact much, but it wasn't like he was specifically asking for a lawyer to defend him. He was just not going to say anything more. There is the reports of the jail medical records, which show he was basically withdrawn and defensive and not really showing any insight when they initially...
And you're talking, are these records close to November 6th?
Right, right after he's brought into jail. Essentially, from the jail medical records, what happened initially, as I read them, is he was withdrawn and not providing much information about his thought processes. He first opened up, as well as I can tell, to anybody other than defense counsel when Dr. Danziger saw him within a few days, I believe, of coming to jail, at which time he was evidencing the same kind of delusional system and paranoia. He continued to evidence that with Dr. Burns and I believe Dr. Tressler. And my recollection, without looking at the jail medical records again, is that by some point in December, he essentially broke and started talking to them directly about his paranoid delusional stuff.
And so it is your professional opinion that on November 6th of
Illness and his lack of capacity to rationally appreciate the wrongful nature of his actions due to his paranoid delusional system.
All right, thank you. No further questions at this time.
Cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
You're not trying to tell this jury that at no point in time would Mr. Rodriguez have the ability to understand the consequences of his actions. He certainly had the ability to do that at various points in time throughout his lifetime.
Yes.
Okay. He also had the ability to understand the difference between right and wrong, for the most part.
Can you clarify what you're asking me?
How
I mean,
so?
you do mean during
I mean,
the
the
course of
ultimate
his...
question that you've tried to answer here, or gave an opinion about, is whether or not he knew the difference between right and wrong on November 6th of 2009. It's not like he doesn't know the difference between right and wrong 24/7.
No, not throughout his life. I think that he certainly had periods of time where he was so paranoid and delusional that he lacked that capacity.
All right. And in fact, he told you that there was nothing about the delusions that even fed this event because he couldn't remember what happened. He had no insight into why it happened, correct?
He told me he did not know why it happened. Right. That's what he told me.
Right. So when you and I talked, you recall that on October 22nd of 2013, you told me that there was nothing that he said to you out of his own mouth that led you to believe his delusions fed this event?
There's nothing he could tell me about why he did it, I believe. Yes.
So he didn't tell you, for example, that he got to the floor where RSNH was and Sharptooth was there.
He did not tell me the Sharptooth was there.
In fact, he didn't tell you that Sharptooth was in the building, correct?
He has told me that Sharptooth communicates with him by these radio frequencies, and I don't believe that he has told me he's ever actually seen Sharptooth face to face, but that it happens constantly, but not that he physically has seen this individual.
All right. And he didn't tell you that Sharptooth told him that the people at RSNH were going to kill him that day?
Not that day that I recall he said that specifically, no.
All right. So he did not tell you that there was an imminent threat to his life that he needed to defend himself against when he went to RSNH that day?
He told me that he believed that he was being stalked and there was a threat in a persistent fashion against him and his family. He told me that he did not have insight as into, well, he didn't use the word insight, but he told me he did not know why he shot.
All right, you're answering my question indirectly. My direct question is, he did not tell you on November 6th of 2009 when he went to that building that Sharptooth had told him that there was an imminent threat from these people at RSNH that he had to defend himself against.
He did
correct?
not tell me that, correct.
So when you are evaluating the facts and circumstances of this case in order to come to an opinion that you can share with the fact finder, which in this case is the jury, it is important, is it not, to look at and understand everything connected with the defendant and the event.
As much as possible.
Okay. And what you've told the jury, again indirectly, is that you didn't read the witness statements, you read a summary of those statements.
That's not accurate. I read the statements that were provided to me. Initially, I went through them, and then I went back and I delineated several that I went back and read again, which I can give you the list again if you wish.
All right. What you said on direct was you had these statements, and you said this in deposition as well, correct? You had these statements, they're a foot thick, you skim them, you look at them, you read them, they are well summarized in a 22-page police report that is what? An eighth of an inch, quarter inch thick, as opposed to a foot of stuff that would take a long time to go through.
Actually,
correct?
No, not exactly correct, because the witness statements were not a foot thick. It was the entire discovery that was given me. A bunch of those were 911 logs and other kinds of things like that. The witness statements I looked at, I just went back and I mentioned the ones that I went through and looked at again, which was Rafael Velasquez, Jesse Forrest, Maureen Daly, and James Beverly. I believe I looked at others, but not in as much detail as those.
All right. Now, you're talking about Mr. Beverly, Mr. Forrest, Ms. Daly, Mr. Velasquez, and Mr.